going to get started. Good morning. I got a bunch to cover, so I'm going to get going here. People will start coming in. There's still a lot of people who are still moving in. If there's empty holes or anything like that around you, could you close ranks as much as possible so people can get to the free seats that are available? There's a lot of people flowing in still. So, word from our sponsors. I love them. My name is Lindhorst. I'm the lead program manager of working on Visual InterDev 6.0 as one of the leads there. I'll be talking about advanced DNA programming using the VI paradigm, the VI scripting objects, the VI design type controls. And this is really the heart of Visual InterDev. This is how you build applications in a very rad manner for the web. So I'm going to demonstrate how Visual InterDev scripting library and design type controls, both working together, can simplify building web applications. Now, that's a mouthful. What it really means is we took a hard look at Visual InterDev 1.0 and what other people were doing with web apps, and we're looking for a way to build applications much more like you do build applications in Visual Basic. Much more rad-like. We have a form and some controls, and you can build up a page and a set of pages for an application very easily and very quickly. And hopefully with more robustness than we traditionally have building ASPs by hand. So that's going to be the gist of my talk in general. You've probably seen this slide a few times by now. I'll be talking about the clients, both thin and thick, talking to business logic that's in the middle, which will also be connected to databases. And really, VI tries to span this entire spectrum, where you build the client stuff in HTML, you build the server stuff in ASP plus components, and you build the database connectivity using ADO and SQL Server. In terms of our specific technologies that we focus on, web server with IS is obviously at the center of it. Active server pages form what we do on the server for generation of HTML, interactivity with the client. We focus on two kinds of clients, two main kinds that I'll touch on a number of times during the talk. The first is a rich client, Internet Explorer, where we can take advantage of dynamic HTML to give a very rich experience to the user. And then the second kind we call Reach, and this includes IE3, Netscape Navigator, other browsers that don't support dynamic HTML today. So we focus on those two main things, and you'll see in the product kind of a dichotomy between those two throughout. VI, as I said, kind of focuses on this space. We also focus on the connectivity to the database, obviously. And Visual Studio kind of encompasses the entire thing, including the generation and creation of databases and connectivity, MSMQ, and other services. So this VI 6 is relatively new. I'm just going to run down some of the high-level features just to get you more acquainted with the product. First and foremost is WYSIWYG editing has been introduced in the product for the first time. So instead of having to do everything in a text editor using tags, you can now just drag and drop content, graphics, style sheets, etc. directly onto the form and make it look the way you want it to look. It doesn't mean we gave up on source. Source is still there, and we support design type controls in line. We support IntelliSense for text when you're typing code, so you can do things like window.document, and we autocomplete for you and show you what options are there for the object. End-to-end debugging is another huge feature. This allows us to do debugging on the client, as well as do debugging on the server, even remotely, where the server doesn't have to be the same machine I'm debugging upon. Very hot feature. Site design and management tools, so I can build pages that look and feel consistent with the other pages that make up my application. And we give you facilities for putting navigation bars and other automatic means to navigate between the pages. Database tools, we built on top of the VI 1.0 database tools for authoring against SQL Server, and now we author against Oracle as an equal partner to SQL Server. Extensible shell scripting library, which is the focus of what I'll talk about today, and the design type controls, which target the scripting library. So jump into the scripting library. These are components that we provide in VI that allow you to build your applications out of stock components that come off the toolbox. You think about a Visual Basic program today, you have a form, you have some controls, you drag them off the toolbox onto the page, and you use them right there. The idea is to take scripting library and the design type controls and give you that same kind of experience, design the page. So, at a lower level, they're an object-oriented abstraction on top of web concepts like buttons and text boxes. They expand both dynamic HTML for the richest possible client and active server pages. So, if you think about building an ASP that's going to be server-based, what does it mean to drag a text box or a button onto an ASP page, which is UI-less? It's going to be running on the server. I'll show you how we use that abstraction to build that kind of a page where we remote the UI to the client. And as I said, support for building those broad reach apps. In terms of the model features itself, it's a runtime layer. So it doesn't replace anything that you do in HTML. It doesn't replace anything you do in ASP in terms of generating HTML. What it does is it provides you with a text box or a button that you can reason about your program as an object, as opposed to having to think about the object or the text that will be generated on ASP. It's very much event and method dispatch oriented. So if you think about an ASP where you execute serially, straight from the top to the bottom, the script is executed wherever it lies in that stream. Instead, we'd like to do ASP programming where I have events on the server, where literally I hit a button on the client and I have an on-click event that runs on the server. Likewise, I have page enter, page exit, etc., other kinds of events that make sense in an ASP world, where the script can be anywhere, and I can think about it much more as a form and code behind the form as opposed to a serial execution. State management is something that's very difficult to do, not difficult, but it's tedious to do in HTML today, where you have input fields which are hidden, or you're otherwise moving state between the client and server by hand, or using session variables, which have some issues with scalability. We give you some facilities for abstracting above both of those, so that you can just talk about properties as just variables, and we give you options for how to manage that state. The script objects themselves, we'll get into those in a little bit more detail. And then finally, asynchronous remote execution, where from the client, I can make a call up to the server, and I can say that method on the server in this ASP, I want to run that method. Get a result back without ever replacing the page which is in the client. So let's review a little bit about these execution models a little bit deeper. If you think about an active server page, you start at the top, and the thing that runs at the top is whatever's at the, it's a script up there in angle bracket %, that's going to get executed before script down below. And it's a very serial execution. You go straight through. It's intended to be that way for efficiency's sake. You go through it, and you're out of it as quickly as possible. You've generated your page. Typically, these pages are strings of HTML and code. But if you compare this to a DHTML model, where you have objects on a page, and a document object model which binds that stuff together, in this world, you have controls much more like a Visual Basic application, where the control is firing some kind of an event. And I write an event handler in script which catches it. For example, an onload or an on-click, that kind of event can be anywhere in the stream, and it's just code which happens to be embedded along with the form definition. Very much event-driven. What we try to do with the scripting object model is try to bring that event-driven model to ASP, so that you can reason about these kinds of programs in a very similar manner. So there's not this disparity between the two different ways of doing programming. For a Visual Basic programmer, it'll make more sense in that you can put a control down, you can write a click event behind it, and write that code, and you're off and running. You don't have to worry about the serial execution, the state management, and other stuff you have to worry about in ASP that you write by hand today. And we try to make these two models as consistent as possible. We provide an element like a text box. We wrap the HTML text box and provide an ASP text box that are very similar. So that the code that you write in either place can look the same and potentially can be moved between them depending on the needs of the application. So, digging deeper on that ASP execution flow, if you think about it, the client's going to come in and it's going to request a page. HTTP GET comes in. What will happen is we'll provide an on-enter event on the ASP. That'll run some code. It'll modify state on that page, potentially state that came down from the client where it was in session state, generate some HTML, which becomes a response, and then we'll provide an on-exit event so that you can save away other state or do other processing you need to do after the page is done finished generating the text it needs to generate. That gets sent down to the client. This is the basic model. If you take it one step further and think about a button that might be on the client and a click event that you would like to catch on the server, what happened there is I get somebody request from the browser. Potentially I have a way of intercepting it first to make sure that this button click is valid, that I can do some validation down the client first. Get up to the server, run some kind of on-enter events where I can set up things the way I want them to be for this form, run the on-click event handler, which would change some state based on that button being clicked or navigate to another page potentially, and then execute an on-exit event. That on-exit could save away some state or otherwise tear down the form on the server. The response goes down the browser and I've got my page. So it's doing the same thing that ASP does today. And in fact, we build on top of ASP today such that you can do all the ASP things you expect to be able to do today completely. But we provide you with some of these abstractions which are a little bit more consistent with what you would do in client programming today. To recap, there's a page event for the ASP. The server provides an on-enter, an on-exit. And an on-before server event is fired on the client so that I can do low-level validation before I end up back on the server. So I can catch things early. We provide a set of rich scripting library objects that interact with these events. So I'm switching gears from kind of the event model to what objects we provide. We provide a record set, label, text box, a couple of other things that can data assigned to record sets or work independently, independent of a data source. The idea here is to be very much like Visual Basics, drag out a record set, drag out data bound control, and to connect the two. And then as the record set moves, as the cursor moves along, the contents of the controls track with it. Now, let me review design time controls a little bit. I've talked about ASPs and their event model and the scripting objects. Those scripting objects on an ASP are obviously UIlets, and really are just COM objects, or can be thought of as COM objects, that are running up on the server. Design time controls are kind of wrapper on top of that, which allows you at design time to drag something off the toolbox onto the page, define properties for that thing, and make it look the way you want it to look. That'll set state for when the ASP runs, and then the script object will take that into account and use that value. So if you take the example here, I've got a page object DTC, and a little later I'll literally drag that off the toolbox onto a page. That object is an ActiveX control, feels like an ActiveX control when you're working with it, has properties, etc., and property pages, but its intent is used only at design time. It's there as a placeholder, a place where I can hang the properties that I want for that object right there. It'll spit out HTML and text, which will get run on the server or on the client potentially. We include a design time control for each of the scripting objects, the script library objects. So there's a record set script library object that runs at runtime. There's a design time control which targets it. That design time control can either target it for reach or for rich. So that the DTC is abstracted above those two script objects. Runtime uses script objects, I can target either. This allows me that rad development experience where I drag and drop. Okay, with that, I'm going to just switch over to demo and show you some stuff. We'll make it a little bit clearer. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through building this simple application that I have here. What I have here is a page that I've got two drop-downs at the top, which show me the sport and team categorization for some merchandise at the sporting goods store, or memorabilia shop. So I can pick a different sport, like basketball, and the team list automatically changes for me, so it updates to show valid basketball teams. It also updates the graphic based on which team I select. So if it's like Lakers, I see that. You notice that the page itself is not being reloaded from the server. You notice that it's being changed in line, in place. So as I change the drop-downs, the image changes, and the sport drop-down affects the team drop-down. I also have these buttons down here where I can pick different kinds of stuff, like I can pick sportswear, for example. And for this, I actually do make a round trip back up to the server and repopulate this table down below. And I can pick office supplies, and I get a different result back in that grid. So this is doing a query up on the server and populating this HTML table for me based on the results of that query. That round trip, that actually doesn't encompass a round trip because I go back up to the server to do the database access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how we would build something like this and kind of walk you through using the design time controls and the scripting objects to make this page work. So I'm going to switch over to VI, and what I've got here is the basic form of that page with just the theme applied and some just content text, and then 3 HTML buttons, which for the moment I'm not going to use. We'll connect those up a little later. The first thing I want to do is I want to put those 2 drop-downs on where I have the sport and the team. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to my toolbox, and I have a tab here called Design Time Controls. I'm going to pull out a list box control and place it right where I want it in the HTML form in WYSIWYG. And I'll pull out another one for the team. You notice that as I select these guys, the property pane over here updates to show me the properties of this thing, and I'll actually change the ID on this to Sport List. And change this guy to Team List. So when I script against it later, it makes a little more sense. I'm going to save that, view this page in the browser. I've got my page, it's got some content, and it's got 2 empty drop-downs. Disconnected, they don't do anything, they don't show any values. So the next thing I want to do is I want to populate those drop-downs. Now to do this, you could either do it statically, I could go to the control and I could say, here's a list of things, or I could programmatically add items to these things, much like you do in Visual Basic, and that's what we're going to do. Let me go over to Source View, and I see my text, and I see the links for the style sheets, etc. I also see the 2 controls. These are actually in line within my editor, so I'm actually seeing those 2 drop-downs in place. I can still modify properties here just like I did before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some scripts to populate those drop-downs. And I'm going to cheat a little. A feature of VI, which is really great for demos, is I can put snippets of stuff up on the toolbox. So I'm going to use that a lot. But drag this guy out, and what I've drug out is just a couple of utility routines. One does a fill list, which literally does add item right there. And two routines that populate an array with the teams are, with the sports are. This could easily come from a database, but just for the sake of simplicity, I've got some routines that populate those arrays. And what I need to do is, on the onload, or the onEnter for this page, I need to populate those drop-downs. So to do that, literally in the onEnter routine, I'm going to say if the list is empty, so I'm going to say sport list, and I hit dot. I get statement completion against that sport list object. That's a list box as far as this thing is concerned. And I can go ahead and say get count. This is a method on this object. I compare this against 0 to see if it's already been initialized. If it hasn't, I'm going to go ahead and fill it. Yeah, I get statement completion against script routines, one of the really cool features of VI6. Can't see up here. Okay. Go ahead and save this. No, I don't believe in semicolons. And I go ahead and I see my drop-down populated with those values. Okay? So in a very similar way that you would do in things in DB, I literally talked about this list box as an object, and I literally just populated it with values. Now, based on this object, you notice that it doesn't do a whole lot. When I change it, nothing much happens. So what I'm going to do is, based on what value this guy has, I'm going to populate the other one. So to do that, I'm going to go over to the script outline and show you the objects that are on this page. Now, on the ASP page, there's really a client part and a server part. And we show those as client objects and events. You see document, you see window. This is the stuff that actually run on the client. You also see server objects and events. These are objects that are living on the server. Sport list and team list are two objects that are server-based. And I go to the sport list and I see that it's got an on-change event. I can double-click on that, and it starts a template for me for the on-change handler. In here, I can go ahead and I can fill in the other one. Again, I will. Hold 1 second. Same kind of thing here. I'll fill that object with a different array, this time for the teams. But this is parameter arrays because it needs to know which one. So I'll go ahead and read a value off of that object. In this case, I'm getting the text off of the list box for whatever is currently selected. So I get text. Hopefully I have friends. And then because this is an on-change, and I want it to happen the first time, on my on-enter, I want to call that as well, just manually, so that it happens the first time too. To do that, I just go ahead and call it. I told you it was going to script the friends, right? And indeed I did. I do not believe in semicolons. So, here we go. So I've got both drop-downs initially filled with sports and teams. I can go ahead and I can change the sport, and the team list updates appropriately. So now I selected basketball, and I've got the appropriate values for this drop-down. If I select football, I get the appropriate values here as well. So think about what's happening here a little bit. Now, you notice that it flashes. It's going back to the server every time I change this guy. So the object's intelligent enough to know, one, that it has an on-change already defined for it. When I make a change, it goes back up to the server, calls that on-change routine, repopulates the team list box by removing what's there and filling it with the new items, and then sending the page back down to the client. You notice, too, that the state of the sport is automatically retained for me. When I change it from baseball to basketball to football, I don't have to worry about, Did I save away that state? Do I know what it was in the client so that when I come back I have the same value again? That's automatically done for me because the object contains that state. Question? Quick one.
Yeah, back in the AI, how did you get the PDC scripting tag and kind of add the code to that?
Yes. You can say add tab here. And, sorry, excuse me. The question was, how do you get this PDC scripting tab here, and how do you drag these cool demoware kind of thingies back onto the toolbox? And the answer is you can add a tab directly here, rename a tab, organize tabs, and you can just pick up stuff, literally just pick up text, and drag it over here. And it just gets added as an HTML fragment. So, back to where I was. Good question, good straight man. So, a guide for here, and I've shown you this page. I've designed this as an ASP page, a server-based page. And I'm literally going to go over to Netscape and show you this page running there. It doesn't look quite the same because some of the formatting rules are a little different. But it does function. If I pull this down and say basketball, Netscape makes a send back up to the server, and it replaces it and fills it in with the appropriate values. So indeed, this is working both ways. It is very much a reach server-based solution. IE3 would have the same experience. Now, literally any browser that supports JavaScript can run this page. So, let me keep going. We've got so much material. I can't keep taking questions through here. Let me show you something else about this page. I've shown you the reach scenario. I've shown you this page running in across browsers. Let's say we want to target this for IE. How good can we make that experience? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this page out as an HTML file as opposed to an ASP file. And I'm going to make just a few changes to this file to tell it that this is meant for the rich experience, that those drop-downs should be populated on the client, not on the server. To do that, I'm going to go to the document properties. There's a property here called, sorry to read, DTC scripting platform. This setting, the DTCs are inheriting from, and this is telling us those DTCs, like the two list boxes, that this is meant for the server. If I change this to client, those two list boxes become client-based controls. Indeed, if I go back and look at the scripting outline, those objects have moved from the server objects list to the client objects list. I go back to source. If I want to make that kind of a change, these routines here that are now server-based, I need to remove the run equals server so that they're now client-based. And I need to make sure that the onload gets run. So I call it manually from the body's onload events. Say save. And do this in the browser. Now I've got the same page looking, but now if I change things, you notice that this second list box is being redone very quickly without a refresh of the entire page by modifying the HTML on the client. So I change the football, and this is getting updated appropriately almost instantaneously. There's no round trip. Everything's happening in the rich browser using the HTML. I'll show you other examples of again. But you get the idea. I didn't have to change any code. All I need to do is tell those DTCs that the script objects they should target are client-based as opposed to server-based. Okay. Back to slides for a moment. We talk about the page object. Page object serves a couple of different purposes. One you've already seen. You've seen me fire this page underscore on enter. It fires certain events when it's processing a page. Those are interesting to catch when you're loading a page, when you're about to send out HTML, and when you're about to exit the page. Another thing it provides is the ability to hang methods off of the page. So I literally can say, this routine, I want this to be this page dot and give it a routine name so that I can call it from other server pages or I can call it from the client. And when I call it from the client, I can either tell it replace the page or call it asynchronously out of band. And then finally, I can hang properties off of this page. By hanging properties, I can manage state. Those variables will round trip back and forth between the client and server. They can be placed in session state. They can be placed in a couple of different places depending on where I want that state to be stored and how secure it needs to be. So let's cover a couple of these. First is page navigation. When you do HTML to HTML or ASP to ASP connectivity today, you typically have to say href equals HTTP colon, bang, 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 whatever, something.asp, and then question mark, param1 equals blah, param2 equals blah. It becomes a very long URL. What you'd like instead of that, for two reasons, is you'd like the ability to just say page2.method. And we have a little more syntax for that because it's a fairly heavyweight operation. You say page2.navigate.method. And then you can give parameters directly in line. That's a cleaner interface for getting at page 2. It gives you a location of dependence for page 2, where page 2 could potentially move around. You don't have to link this up with all this stuff. And secondly, it allows for statement completion on the parameters. So when I'm literally saying page2.navigate.method, whatever, and I hit open param, I actually see the parameters that I need to supply when I make that call. So I can export ASP script functions as page navigatable methods, and I can invoke those methods from client to server. State management is primarily done through the page properties. So I can literally go to the page object and I can say, add this property, add a foo property. In our example, we'll add a team property and a sport property that I can use from either the client or the server by name. And the page object is responsible for making sure it gets round tripped correctly. Make sure that value is both on the client and the server at the same time and up to date. That is maintained over the lifetime of the page, or you're navigating between the pages there, and you can also pass value between pages. And you can actually store things either in the client, which has great scalability characteristics, where I don't have to be sucking up memory on the server, or I can literally say enable session off, or I can put things in the session or application state as well. So here's an example of page property. I have this page dot set is valid user true. And we use the set get syntax so that it'll work in both the client and server. And there's some other reasons, but that's the syntax we use. The property itself is valid user. The way you set it is set is valid user. You give it a value. And you notice I'm doing that in angle bracket %. That's server logic. Then in the script block below on that event, you notice that I'm reading it. I'm saying this page dot get is valid user. And I'm guaranteed that those two values will be kept in sync. After the page has been generated on the client, I can read and set that value willy-nilly as I need. So with that, let me go back to the demo. Go back to VI. Let's close this HTML. Go back to ASP. What I'm going to go ahead and do is add this page object, which is a no design type control, to this page. And drag that out, stick it on the page. You notice this default name is set to the name of the file. That's how I reference it in other pages if I was doing that. We'll go ahead and open this up. It's properties. Methods I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm going to go over to the property space, and I'm going to define some new page properties here. I'm going to define a team and a sport page property. I'm going to say that the client can both read and write this value. I can optionally say you can just read it so that I don't have to worry about spoofing of that value. I'll say close. And what I'm going to use this for is I'm going to put that emblem, that logo image, onto the page. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to pull a button control. It may seem like an odd thing to pull out, but we're going to do it. The button control has the ability to display not just a caption, but also an image, and that's what we're going to take advantage of. I'll choose the name of this, the team logo. Now what I want to have happen is when the team list on change happens, or when I initially see the page, I want to set the image source for that button so that it displays the proper team logo. So to do this, I'm going to make a couple changes. Scroll. Yes. Oh, sorry. I'll do that. So the first thing I need to do, and I'm going to cheat some more, is I'm going to pull out a team list on change event. So I go to the team list, I say on change, I get the template, then I'm going to go ahead and drag out the text. Put the top frame. Let's look at this text a little bit. What it's going to do is when the team list changes, I'm going to go ahead and set the team page property to the appropriate value. After I've done this, then I can read it both on the client and server, so I know which team I'm talking about. Based on that team setting, I'm going to build a URL that's based off the images directory, based off getting the sport value by doing a get sport on the page object, slash the team object.gif. So that's my own convention for how these images are stored. So you notice I'm changing that on the source for the team logo object for that button. And that will change the image that is displayed. I also set the alternate text as appropriate. Now I need to make a couple of other changes. On the on change for the sport list, I need to get the initial emblem up there for the first time this comes through. So the on enter is calling the sport change. The sport change needs to call the team change to get the appropriate logo there. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just call it at the end of this routine. And then I also need to set the appropriate sport property when the sport changes. So to do that, I do a very similar thing where I set sport based on the current value. Oh, wrong page. So now you see that the initial value, because I'm calling those routines, I get some initial logo there. As I change this, it causes the team to change, which causes the logo to change. So I just changed the team. I also go back up to the server, and the emblem changes again. So by changing the two drop-downs, I'm changing two page properties. By changing those two page properties, I'm changing the URL for what image to display as the logo. Sorry? Yeah, the source code for all this stuff I'll provide on the CD. Sure. Let me go through this in a little bit more detail a little later, because this can be fairly complicated. The basic gist of it is that I've got my selects right here. I've got my table where I've got my buttons. And I've got my input tag. And this has the source equals to get the Lakers.gif right here. So this file that I'm generating isn't incredibly complicated. It's what you would expect to generate from an ASP. Okay, let's go make some other changes. It's time for that table to come out. So to do this, I'm going to drag out a record set control and a grid control. These are already pre-built and pre-wired, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on how to do that right now. Time permitting, I'll do another demo in which I build up something very similar to this, and I'll go through that in a lot more detail. But suffice it to say, I've got a record set here called DB1. It's connected to the products table of a database that has this memorabilia information, and the grid is going to represent that or display that HTML as this page is rendered. But right at the moment, these two things are inert. I've told the record set, don't automatically open. I want you to just be there. And I want to manually set the SQL statement and manually open you and fill in the grid myself. So these two objects by themselves are not going to do anything right at the moment. They're literally inert. And when I refresh this page, I don't see anything. What I want to have happen is when I press one of these three buttons, I want that table to render itself based on the appropriate value for which of the buttons I pressed. So these guys are inert. What I'm going to go ahead and do is define some routines that I can call from the client to get the table to render. To do that, I'm going to go back up to my server script and drag out some more code. going to create a display products routine. What this is going to do is it's going to set another page property for the product type. It's going to go ahead and open the record set. The act of opening this record set fires another event. It fires an onBeforeOpen, which is an event that the record set understands. It fires itself. That's going to set the sequence text based on which team this is. Team equals, and it's actually building a SQL statement right here. Team equals get team off the page object. And then it's going to go ahead and open the record set. After it opens, the grid will display whatever the results were from that record set. And then this close down here on the exit is just cleanup to make sure it goes smoothly. Now I am setting this new page property here, this product type page property. I'm going to go up to the page object and go ahead and define that. Again, make that rewrite. And I'm going to define that method, that display type method, as a method I can call from the client. So instead of taking that routine, that display products routine, and I've said export it, make it available so the client can call into that routine. When it calls into that routine on the navigate, it's literally going to replace the page with the result from making that call and from processing the rest of the page. Now the only thing left to do is to wire those 3 buttons so they call this routine. So then I go back to the script outline. I'm going to look at this form, and down here you see those 3 buttons for sportswear, office supplies, and memorabilia. On button 1, these are just DHTML controls, so the full DHTML DOM is available here in terms of its object model. I'm going to go for the on-click on each of these guys. I'll say this page.navigate.displayProducts, and it tells me that I need a string for the type. I do this for each of these. What this is going to do is it's going to tell the system, the browser, to replace this page with the results of executing that ASP after calling this routine on that ASP. So when I refresh, nothing has happened because the record set and the grid are still inert. When I press this button, it's going to make that call to the server. It's going to tell the record set to go fetch some data based on that SQL statement. The grid will then take that record set and display it, render it as HTML, and then the entire page will be sent back down to the client. The same kind of state management is still going on here, where if I change this to football and Packers and then hit this, it remembers that football and Packers is what's selected and displays the appropriate office place for that team as opposed to another team. So these 2 drop-downs are displaying or setting which team and sport are involved. The 3 buttons are telling the server that I want that type of memorabilia displayed. And on the round trip back up to the server, I'm displaying that table. Just go in there. This is the same page in Netscape. Again, you've got the drop-downs and the image. I can go ahead and change that. Whoa. Okay, now it's back. I have to be careful sometimes with Netscape. And, sorry. So with the drop-downs, hit the button, and I get the same behavior. Again, it looks a little bit different because of the formatting of CSS, how they're processed by both of the browsers, but the same functionality is there. And I change the office supplies, and I see the appropriate values for that. Sometime later. I don't want to think. Okay. Back to slides. One last main topic to talk about. I also don't know why it's so slow with Netscape. It is slower with Netscape. I understand the question. The question is, why is this stored with Netscape? And I honestly do not know. We found that CSS processing and some of the other stuff is not as fast as IE. So if you look at the source, it is the same simple source that I had before. It's not any more complicated. The Netscape source is no different than what I'm sending to IE. And honestly, I do not know deeper than that why it is slower. What script? Give us amongst yourselves, man. Okay, so remote script. Now, what I was doing before, when I was calling the navigate routine, you notice that the page was replacing itself. I was making a round trip, and the table was replacing itself, the drops was replacing themselves. The entire page was updated. It'd be really cool if instead of doing that, I could instead have the client-based drop-downs where I could fix those up, real lickety-split, where I don't have to refresh the page. But to do that, let's say that there's some data on the server that I need to populate that with. It'd be great if I could make a call to the server without replacing the page. And that's exactly what remote scripting allows you to do. It allows me to define a method on the server that I can call from the browser without replacing what's in the browser. I can do this, make the call, get an answer back, and then modify the HTML based on what kind of answer I get back from the server. So just like I did before, I'm going to export an ASP script routine as a page execution method. I can call the server routine from the client and process return value when I get it back. And I can make references to other pages. I can make a reference to any page. Call a routine there and get some answer back and display it appropriately. If you look at syntactically how this looks, it looks somewhat similar to the navigate I showed before, but a little bit different. In this case, because I can do this asynchronously, I have a callback associated with making the call. So in this example, I'm making an execute method 1, just like I did navigate before. The other server is just a routine like before. I can take some parameters, I can process that thing, and I can package up a result and send it back. When that result comes back to the client, the callback routine will be called. And then I can modify the list box based on what came back. I can either do this asynchronously or synchronously. I'll show you an example of both, where I don't necessarily need the callback if I'm willing to wait and just block until the result comes in. Benefits. Obviously, the top three are all about I'm getting just what I need back from the server, just information that I can then render and display using the browser to deal with the HTML generation. And then the last bullet point is a better user experience. I can literally, as a user, continue working on the form, entering other values while some execution is happening, while some results are coming back to modify some other part of the page. So you could imagine entering my name, and I enter my state, and the drop-down for the cities populates in the background while I'm continuing to enter my address. And it's just the sheer nicety that I'm not refreshing the page nearly as often as I was forced to do if it was a pure ASP model. So let's see how this works. Back to our example, again, what I'm going to try to do is eliminate this round trip. When I change one of the drop-downs, I don't want to have to refresh the entire page to make that work. I should just be able to change them in line, like I was doing before when I switched to rich. To do this, I'm going to go over to the eye, and where I have these controls inheriting from the page, these two drop-downs. If you look at their properties, the scripting platform says inherit from this page, and the page is set to server. And I want the page to continue to be set to server because that table is going to be rendered out of doing a database query on the server. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this control should disconnect from that inheritance and be client-based. And I'm going to do that for both of these guys and for my image button. Which I just screwed up. If you look at the scripting outline, you notice that the two drop-downs and the logo image have moved into the client space from the server space. They're no longer in the server space, now they're client things that I can work against. And the same kind of mods that I did before in terms of moving stuff around into the client space makes sense here too. In particular, I'm going to take the on-change event handlers and move these guys into client space. The on-enter and the fill list routine I'm also going to move into client space. But the rest I'm going to leave in the server. Question was, why isn't the server stuff yellow? We got a lot of comments about the yellow code in the 1.0. And I've actually heard some comments here about missing it, which is kind of interesting. We decided ultimately that having the rich syntax coloring for identifiers and statements, et cetera, was more interesting than showing the yellow code. If we do have some little yellow though. If I do angle bracket percents, some yellow, right? So it's not completely gone, but we do color appropriate for the language, the other stuff. Okay, so I need to make a few changes to this guy. The fill list routine, I moved that one, but I didn't move the routines that populate the arrays. And the reason I didn't do that is because, think about those arrays being populated out of a database, where the sports are out of a database and the teams are based on the sports out of a database. And it's not something that's appropriate to move into the client. I really do want to leave that on the server. But I want to be able to call that from the client. So to do that, I'm going to go up to the page object again, or down to it. And where I had to navigate before, I'm going to add 2 executes to get at those 2 routines. To do get sports and to get teams. This is going to allow me to call those things without refreshing the page, by calling them out of band from what the browser is normally doing. By doing that, I can now go make calls to them. In particular, on the on-enter, instead of doing that directly, I'm going to do this instead. Where I create a new call object. This is the syntax for making a call to the server out of band. It looks very similar. Bark call object equals this page dot execute dot get sports. So I'm going to call that routine. I'm going to get a response back when it's finished. And in this example, I'm calling it synchronously. I will block on this routine here, on this line, until the call is complete. Until I can read call object.return value. After I have that, I effectively have the array that I had up on the server. And literally, we move objects that are based in JavaScript directly from the server to the client as objects. So this will be a real live JavaScript array when it gets down to the client. Go ahead and call fill list. After I do that, I do pretty much what I did before. Nothing new there. In the on-change events, I need to make a similar modification. But in this case, I'm going to do an asynchronous call to get the value. In this case, I'm going to call get teams here. But I'm going to tell it, don't wait. Just go ahead and make the call. And call me back on a callback when you're finished. And I specify that here by saying, this is the routine I want to be called back. I'm going to go ahead and copy that into place. So I've broken the functionality of the sport list on change into 2 parts. The part that sets the page property and initiates the call to the server, and the part that gets the answer back from the server and populates the team list based on that. Last thing I need to do is update the body on load like we did before. And theoretically, we're good to go. Now you see the drop-downs come in blank initially. And that's because they literally are blank when they come down from the server. And then the code on the on-enter populates the sport list by making a call to the server and getting back that array of sports. Then after that's populated, it calls again up to get the teams and get that information. Now when I make changes to this guy, when I change it to the basketball, the second drop-down will make another call back up to the server, get the appropriate team information for the new sport, and populate the list box. It does it relatively quickly. Out of band. You notice the page did not refresh. You also notice that as I change this guy, the logo is also keeping up to date too. So what I've done is I've moved the 2 drop-downs and the list and the button that was displaying the image to make them client-based, where I can do things in the HTML. But I still need server connectivity for doing things like database access. And for this, I go back up to the server and do a full refresh of the page where I can generate that HTML. I can potentially do the rest of the HTML part also down on the client, but I didn't do that in this example to keep it simple. This does not work on other browsers because the two dropdowns are basically the HTML. So this is an IE4 solution only at this point. Okay. Give you the big picture summary, and then I want to do one more demo quickly that shows database connectivity in more detail. So what we've built is a great tool for building both broad reach web pages and HTML user interfaces. We're trying to enable rapid application development by learning what you need to know to build that thing, to connect things together. And we're trying to make it very compatible with MTS and military business objects. So as you all are packing, I'm going to show you one more thing, which is pretty cool. The example I gave you was obviously canned. I'm copying code left and right? Let's just start with something brand new. A brand spanking new page. One of the facilities of VI is the ability to add themes and layouts to a page. So I'm going to go ahead and add a theme to this just to make it look a little nicer. Same thing I was using before. And this puts the style sheet stuff in there. That's all I've done so far. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a page that's going to display customers out of a database, allow me to edit the detailed information for those customers, and then using a master detail, it's going to show me the orders associated with that customer as well. And I'm going to do that real fast. So don't blink. Here comes the record set. And what it just prompted me for was to enable the scripting object model. That's the infrastructure this all stuff works at. And that's inserts this gray stuff at the top and at the bottom. I just put a record set down. I'm going to call this the customer's record set. What's going on? Oh, sorry. I'm going to pull this out of Northwind, so I'm going to pull out the customer's table out of there. After doing that, I'm going to pull out a grid. So setting up that record set is pretty much what I had to do before, but I didn't go through all the detail. I'm going to go to the grid and I'm going to set properties on it. I'm going to bind it to that record set. So I'm going to say I want that customer record set. It automatically knows what fields are associated with that record set. I'm going to click off the couple that I care about. Resize this will look a little nicer. So I'm going to properties say how many fields I want. Save this guy. Do this in the browser, and I've got the grid that's showing me my customers, and they allow me to do page navigation on those customers so that I can move between them fairly easily. That's cool. Oh, yeah. You ain't seen nothing yet. This is where I get to have some fun. So I'm going to insert a table with one row and two columns, just for formatting purposes. I'm actually going over to design view because this will look a little nicer there. I'm going to take this grid, I'm going to drag it into the table. And over here on the side, in this other part, I'm going to drag some text boxes where I can modify values directly in that table. To do that, I'm going to use something we call the data environment, which you can't read because it's too far over. Let me straighten this out for you a little bit. The data environment hangs off the global ASA and defines the connections and commands that are associated with connecting to databases. So I've got a Northwind connection, I've got a command already defined. I'm going to go and pull over the contact name, title, address, city, regions here, those guys. Pull those out of the D, I'm going to plop them in place. Notice it automatically labels them for me and connects them to that command. I'm actually going to rebind these guys to my record set. So what will happen is these guys will move at the same time the record set pages through records. So save. So now I've got my grid that's showing me all the records, and I've got my text boxes where I can modify values. As I page through this, I go in and I can see the values in the text boxes updating appropriately. This is only one part. So the next thing I need to do is, instead of doing page navigation, I also need record level navigation. So I can move between records as opposed to paging through. It's just a simple property on the grid. Tell it that I want to do row level navigation and what color the selection should look like. Now I've got a couple extra buttons here where I can actually move between different records, and you see that the details for that record are displaying here. Now, that's cool. That's a pure reach scenario. Everything I'm doing is server-based. I'm literally going back up to the server, getting that table repopulated, and coming back down, and you see it flash each time. Let's say instead of that, I wanted to do something just in the client. I'm going to go ahead and change the page from a server page to a client page. I refresh, it comes in blank initially, but then fills in with the data. And now I can do navigation directly within the browser and modify those values directly in place without having to refresh the page each time. It's a much better experience. And I can do this because I didn't write any script. I didn't have to move anything around. But you get the idea that these objects can be very easily moved from reach to rich. I'm sorry? Yes, it is. The question was, how is the data connection to the client happening? Yes, it is. It's going through RDS, the RDS control that's supplied with IE. Hold on the questions. Let me keep going for a moment. I'm on a roll. Okay. Now, that's cool and all, but those values in the text boxes, wouldn't it be great if I could update those? Wouldn't it be cool if I could go modify a value and hit an update button and it just worked? Well, I've got the tool for you. I'm going to pop a button down here, put some properties on it, like I'm going to call it update, and the caption should be update, seems appropriate. Now I'm going to have to go write some script. When that button is clicked on the client, I want the server to update the record set. So I go to my scripting outline, look at the server object, so now I have an update button, which indeed has an click event, get my prototype, and now I can say customers rs dot update record. Refresh. Now I've got my button, and I can go ahead and I can change a value. Say update, it's going to round trip up to the server and update that value. And indeed, when I move off this record and back on, you'll see that it's correctly updated. It's pretty well. Sorry? Yeah, I'm refreshing the page. Anyway, hold on, just one more minute. Just one more cool thing, and I'll be done. The last thing I want to do is a master detail. And for this, I'm going to use another page object event called onShow. That event is going to tell me when I'm moving through this record set, when I'm changing the value, one cursor is moving. And what I need to know is, after it's moved, or after it's been updated, or if it hasn't been updated, I need to update the other record set, the detailed record set, to reflect the value that it has. So to do this, I'm going to add another record set and another grid. This record set I'm going to call orders. I'm just going to give it a SQL statement to use this time, as opposed to connecting directly to an object, because I'm going to fill in the SQL statement based on what customer I want to do the query for. I'm going to tell it not to open automatically. Instead, I'm going to open it explicitly myself. Which is easy as that. Okay. Pull out the grid. Same kind of thing goes on here. You notice that I have the two record sets displayed that I get to choose from. This time I want the orders RS. Oops. Excuse me for a moment. So that I can fill in the fields, I need to tell it what table to go against. Okay. Orders RS, what I want is order ID. I'll put customer ID just so I can see that it's working. Employee ID, order date. Sounds good to me. I'll go fix this up. Done. Now what I've got is effectively a record set that's inert. It needs some code to say go, and the grid that's bound to it. And it also needs to be told when to go. To do that, I'm going to, based on enter for this page, when the first record set moves, I want the second one to move. Oh, yes, okay. So this, I'm going to go back to this page on the server. Which I need a page object for. Go to my script outline, I'll see this page here. I'm going to put something in the onEnter and the onExit. On the onEnter, onShow. I'm going to read the value from the first record set, create some select statement based on what customer selected, and go ahead and open the record set. And on the onExit, to clean things up, I'm going to go ahead and close that record set. So this is the connection between the master and the detail. In the detail is based on the onShow. That routine is going to run and read values out of the master, find out what customer ID is associated with it, build up a select statement, run a second query against the database to pull out the orders, and let the grid display that value. So it's probably not a good idea to put it in the same tab. So drag it down here underneath. So what we've got now is I've got the master here, where I can move record for record. I can update values here, and I'm displaying in the bottom of the grid the appropriate orders for that record. So they're connected. Okay? So I'm done playing. We have a few minutes for questions. If you could use the mics, they're taping the session supposedly. That would be helpful. You have some questions? Yes. Yep. If you have questions, there are microphones out there somewhere. There are, sir. Okay, just yell at me then. Is it the
columns of the drop-down list for like A, B, or C
in the grid? The question is, can you put a drop-down in the grid? And there are techniques for layering a control on top of the grid, but not directly putting an object like that inside the grid. So there are ways to do it. If you want to take one afterward, I can talk about some of the techniques for doing it. It's not directly supported.
Nice. Is there some way to bind page variables to controls so that, say, if you selected something out of a list box, the page variable will be automatically updated?
No, that's correct. The question is, can you heard the question. The question is, can you bind the property directly so that it can just track automatically? And the answer is no. You need to go through script to make that happen. You need to catch on changes and do the appropriate scripting inside there.
On the record set, design time control, that record set,
Yes.
that is not analogous to an ADO record set, correct?
The question is that record set DTC, is that an ADO record set? The answer is kind of. The record set DTC is a design time control, which spits out a script object. And that script object makes use of an ADO object. So it wraps it to a degree so that we can do bookmarking and some interesting things we need to do there.
Okay, but you can't put a ADO record set on your ASP page and use that and bind the table to.
You cannot, that's correct. You cannot directly bind those objects to an ADO record set.
Okay, can you bind to a record set or somehow attach it to a record set that's in a COM object?
You can, yes, you can. You can return an ADO record set and bind that into the record set object. And that way you can wrap it appropriately and then data bind against it.
Okay, so the ADO record set is a property of the design time control record set?
It's a little more complicated than that, but yes, that's effectively what happens.
Okay.
The question was, how is concurrency being handled when I did my updates? So ASP automatically is serialized per session. Go to that? Oh. I can do it on a server-based page like this. I do an update per record. And if I want to do a batch update of some kind, then I can pull down a record set locally and modifications to it locally, and then batch up the changes back up to the server. But in the example I used, it was purely server-based. This page can be used in any browser, and as such, you can't do any caching like that on the client. The question is, how do you do updates when the record set returning is from a stored procedure? The answer is you can bind against the results from the stored procedure, but to do updates, you typically talk through another stored procedure, or potentially that same stored procedure with some different parameters, which doesn't automatically do the updates based on that. You need to manually call a different sprock for that. It depends on your sprock is written. You potentially could batch up some values, send them to the server as one request, or one update call, and then call a sprock. Iteratively from there, have a sprock that can handle multiple inputs. The question is, remote scripting in NC5.0 thing. It is not. It is available today in VI6 and has been available for almost a year up on the scripting website in another form. Question is, when will Netscape have the same richness of the DOM, the HTML, as IE has? And I also don't know the answer to that question. Netscape doesn't have some working on DOM for Netscape 5, but that's just hearsay as far as I'm concerned at this point. It is an issue, which is why we focus so much on the rich scenario today, and allow you to do rich if you want to take advantage of that stuff in an IE-only scenario today. We don't
Can you actually go during the execution of the ASP, can you just check the log, check in which browser it is and change it on the fly?
The question is, can you change? When I was switching between reach and rich, I was doing it at design time. Is it possible to do that at runtime? And the answer is no. We specifically didn't do that because it's a very difficult problem. And I can tell you all about the issues we were into trying to make that work. But effectively, the two environments are very different object models. You have the document object model versus an ASP object model. And it's impossible to get those two to connect firmly. So those are the one issues there. So we went for, instead, for a very explicit, very much this is client, this is server approach. Yeah, that's in design time you can change it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can have two different pages on the server. You can change it in design time and save out the second page like I was doing with an HTML page.
Where is the client state stored when you don't use a session object?
Whoa, one from above. question was, where's the client state stored if you're not using a session object? The answer is we put hidden fields into the form and move this client state that way.
So you don't move the state back and forth using cookies?
We do not use cookies, no.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We're updating records, so we have a locking mechanism for the database. Is that right? There's yes. So that's good. There's a number of options for how to do locking, optimistic or not, etc. On the record set object. So you have some control over how that's done.
Will the rich client features work on the Unix version of Internet Explorer?
I honestly don't know. You have to ask one of the IE experts on that.
Well, we can get special code models. Attach control on the grid here as well. Have some special code attach the control.
Oh, attach the controls on the grid. The question was, will there be sample code for attaching controls on the grids? And I don't know if there's any available right now. We've got some internal working on that, and we'll probably be publishing a white paper soon on how to do that.
When you got to the end of the first example and you said Netscape can't handle the asynchronous call, can it handle the call, just not dynamically filling the list boxes?
Yeah, so sorry if it was unclear. The question was, when I said Netscape couldn't support asynchronous calls, why was that? And the answer is, it can support the asynchronous calls, absolutely. So the problem is the updated list box, or let's say it was a list box, but it was something like updating some content. Without a HTML DOM to work against, it's impossible to make that kind of a
Right, so if we wanted to do something different, like something lame, like put up an alert box or something, you could pull that off.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to need to shut down, they're telling me, so I'm going to go out there and we can talk further, or downstairs or outside, or they're throwing me out completely. So I'm going to go downstairs and outside, and we can keep talking there. Thanks.